Hi, my name is Zoe Ma, and today in this video, we will show you how to connect the SageMaker notebook to EMR, which includes the following steps. We will first spin up a Spark cluster, then configure the necessary security groups to allow connections between SageMaker and EMR, and finally, connect the SageMaker notebook to Spark on EMR using Livy. Livy is an open-source REST interface for interacting with Spark clusters from anywhere without the need for a Spark client. We will also show you later how to use a lifecycle configuration to automate the whole process. By connecting your SageMaker notebook to EMR, it allows you to enhance the SageMaker capabilities and build models on large quantities of data. We will first set up EMR Spark Livy. Let's go to the AWS Management Console, and from the Service menu, search for EMR. Click on it, and it will take you to the EMR console. Choose Create Cluster. Go to Advanced Options on the top of the page, and under Software Configuration, we will uncheck everything and only choose Livy and Spark specifically. Then choose Next. In this page, we will look at the network. Select your VPC, and in this case, mine is just default VPC, and also I just choose the first subnet here in the list. You will also want to make a note of your EC2 subnet because you will need this later. Click on Next, and Next. You can also include any other options to your cluster that you think might be appropriate, such as adding KPIs for remote access to your nodes or a custom name to the cluster. In this case, we will just choose Next and then choose Create Cluster. You will be redirected to the cluster page. Your cluster will take a few minutes to spin up, so give it some time. Wait until your cluster is marked as waiting in green. When it's ready, choose the cluster you created. Let's find your private IP address for the master node of your Spark cluster. Choose the Hardware tab. Choose your master's ID, and go to the right to find your private IP address. We will save this for later. In this example, mine is 172.31.4.138, but yours will be different. Now let's set up security groups and open ports so that our Amazon SageMaker notebook can talk to our Spark cluster via Livy on port 8998. Let's go back to the console, open a different tab so that we can always go back and check information for our EMR cluster. And let's search for EC2 in this console. On the left, under Network and Security, click on Security Groups. Click on Create Security Group, where we can give it a name. We can call it SageMaker EMR, and choose the VPC that you used for creating your EMR cluster. Then choose Create Security Group. I already had the security group created, so I will just show you. And as you can see, I give it a name, which is called SageMaker EMR. The description says allow SageMaker EMR connection, and I choose the VPC that I use for creating EMR cluster. Now we create a security group, so we only open the ports to instances that are in this group. Take a note of the security group ID. We will still need to open the port in our Elastic MapReduce Masters group. This is the EMR Master Security group that was automatically created when we create our EMR cluster. So let's go back to our EMR summaries page. And go to the bottom of the page, find our security group for master, click on it, and it will take you to the security group. We're looking at the master, and we'll add the inbound roles. We want to create a custom TCP role on port 8998, which is Livy, and to set the security group ID to the group ID from the SageMaker notebook security group that we created earlier, which we called it SageMaker EMR. Choose Save Rules. Now we open the important ports, so our SageMaker notebook instances can talk to EMR cluster over Lively. Next, let's set up SageMaker notebook. We will go back to the console, go to the SageMaker console, choose Notebook Instance, and choose Create Notebook Instance. Let's give a name to our notebook instance. In this case, I will just call it SageMaker EMR Testing. And for the IAM row, choose a row with Amazon SageMaker full access and access to any necessary S3 buckets, or you can have SageMaker to generate that row for you by simply clicking on Create a new row. Then you need to make sure that you set up your notebook instance in the same VPC as your EMR cluster. So click on Network to expand all the options, choose the VPC, and also select the same subnet as the EMR cluster. We can always go back to the EMR detail page to making sure we're selecting the same subnet. And for the security group, select your security group that you created earlier for notebook instances, which for me is SageMaker EMR. And finally, we will choose Create Notebook Instance. The notebook instance will take a few minutes to set up, so wait until your EMR finishes provisioning the cluster and the SageMaker notebook status change to in service. Now that my notebook is ready, let's connect notebook to EMR. We have our EMR Spark cluster and our SageMaker notebook running, but they cannot talk to each other yet. So let's set up Spark Magic in SageMaker so it knows how to find our EMR cluster. Choose the notebook we just created and choose Open Jupyter. In the Jupyter console, choose New and choose Terminal. It will take you to a terminal window like this. We will run the following command. We will first go to Spark Magic, download a sample file, renaming it, and then we'll edit the config.json file by replacing every instance of localhost with the private IP of your EMR cluster that you used earlier. So let's do nano config.json file. And we're looking at 3 localhosts that we want to replace. So let's go back to our EMR summary page again. Check our private IP address. Alright, with that in mind, go back to our terminal. We will do a search. We'll find all the localhosts and replace it with our IP address. In this case, 172.31.4.138. Great. And press enter. We will replace all. And we'll control save. This should replace 3 instances of localhost in the URL field of the 3 kernel credentials. Now let's test our connections to EMR over Lively. We can do that by running the following command. Curl your EMR master private IP address, which in our case is 172.31.4.138, and our Lively host and sessions. If everything works fine, your output should look like this. If you're getting error, most likely there was something wrong with your security group inbound rule settings, so I would go back and check again. Now it seems like connection is working correctly. Let's close the terminal. Type exit and close the terminal window. Open the tab of the Jupyter. Choose Spark Magic to open a new notebook. Let's restart the kernel just to make sure. And input info to see if we have an active session. Great! You now have a Spark Magic kernel running in your Jupyter notebook, talking to your EMR Spark cluster by using Lively. Now, what if we want to automate this process so that every time I restart my notebook will be automatically connected to my EMR cluster? We can do this by creating a lifecycle configuration script. Let's go back to the SageMaker console, choose Create Notebook Instances. Let's give a name to our notebook instances, and in this case, I will call it SageMaker EMR Auto Test. Click on Additional Configuration to expand all the options, and under Lifecycle Configuration, choose Create New, and let's give it a name. EMR SageMaker. For the script, we will copy the code from this documentation here. Control an Amazon EMR Spark instances using Notebook. But if you're looking closely to the code, it's essentially doing the same thing as we just did from the Jupyter terminal. We are copying the sample config file from GitHub. We are doing a search and replace all the local hosts with our EMR IP address, and we'll send a sample request to Livy to test our connection. So let's copy this code, go back to our creation, and change the IP address to our own EMR master IP address. And in this case is 172.31.4.138. Choose Create Configuration. For the IAM role, remember to choose a role with Amazon SageMaker full access and also access to any necessary S3 buckets. So we're using the same role as before. Same for the network, making sure that we're setting up notebook instances in the same VPC as your EMR cluster, same subnet, and also the security group we created earlier for the notebook instances, which in our case is SageMaker EMR. Choose Create Notebook Instance. This notebook instances will take a few seconds to start. Once the status changed to in service, we can go to the Jupyter console, open a new PySpark Spark Magic notebook, and check our connection. You will see similar output from our manual process above. So let's choose it, open Jupyter, open a new Spark Magic notebook, and check connection. You should see the similar output from our manual process above. Great! Now you have a working notebook, and every time you restart the notebook, the connection to EMR will be automatically established. I hope this is helpful. You can also check for a few other notebook examples on next steps, how to ingest data in Spark Notebook, process data with PySpark, and eventually training a model using Spark and build machine learning pipeline. Thank you.